Hello, my name's Dale Hawthorne and welcome to my channel. I do have some things on my channel about classical education, Christian education, and I may be putting on more at the point in the future. Um, Back when I was in first year psychology in my college degree, our professor who had been around, he was going on elderly, and he had been around for a while. He'd probably been teaching since the 1930s or somewhere around there. And he brought up a quote from the poem, The Vision of Sir Launfal. And what is so rare as a day in June? And he wondered if anyone knew where that was. And I said, yeah, I knew the name of that and where that came from. And he said, singled me out in front of the class, said, young man, you have had a classical education. He was very surprised about that. So, but, oh, yeah, for more on what I have to say about this, please click like and subscribe. There's going to be some more in the future. I don't have it really queued up in the right now in for things to do, but there are things I will be saying about education, classical education, from that point going way back in the time. Because hey, as you'll find out as I talk, um, I had an unintentional classical education. I didn't even know I was having it at the time. So we're seeing a new emphasis on classical Christian education in our time. I think there's a real sense that there's an overemphasis on vocational and career skills, and that our educational institutions, particularly our colleges and universities, aren't producing very good people, and that are doing a lot of political indoctrination. And some books on that which I've read in the past. Allan Bloom has the classic one, The Closing of the American Mind, and Who Killed Homer is another one. Victor Davis Hanson was one of the authors there. So we have vocational education. That's good to teach people marketable job skills and to be able to prepare them for a career. But they may actually change careers. So what kind of foundation are we putting for them? What type of liberal education in the education for a free man, classical education that we have, that doesn't degenerate into political indoctrination, activism, which doesn't last very long. It doesn't have a long shelf life on it, being married in your educational process to the partisan politics of a certain decade. So we're starting to see a return, a desire for more classical education, and even looking back into the Greek and Roman times. And personally, we talk about the trivium: rhetoric, logic, language, literature. There's a good book on that, just simply called The Trivium. It's by a sister. I've been reading through it. I don't remember her name offhand, but can put that in the notes. But inadvertently, I did have elements of classical education that came through my teachers. I was taught phonics, definitely, I know, in third grade by the teacher. It was a way of reinforcing and getting us to read better. And I was already reading beyond grade level, but that helped me there. And in the eighth and ninth grade, we had a grammar teacher, a writing teacher, and then our Latin teacher, who they drummed into us grammar to be able to understand English well, to be able to write well. To the writing teacher, then I really don't know that I appreciate how much she may have helped me. I knew that back when I was in the ninth grade, freshman in high school, at the time, that it was a class that I ate it up and went to it, and she really liked me. But went on. The Latin teacher, first year Latin teacher, she did make it a point to bring English into it, and she did think that that was really the problem with a lot of people in my school in the classes learning Latin. It wasn't Latin so much as English, and I think there's also something there that they may not have taught learning a language as they could have. How to learn vocabulary. I picked that up years later. And the same psychology professor, which I mentioned in the opening here, that my freshman year psychology professor did have some good things to tell us about how to learn a language. I was surprised, and they helped me later on. And I went on, as I was in college, to a classics degree in college. And after I had become a believer in Christ, I changed to a music degree. And it was still considered an elite degree at that time. My degree, when I mentioned Victor Davis Hanson, we're about from the same degree background and about from a lot of the same things, although he went on and got a lot deeper, a lot more extensive in what he read, and has spending his adult life teaching that. So, and then I came to biblical understanding too. Began to read my Bible the day after I came to saving faith in Christ. I can talk about that. I didn't understand it much at first, but my understanding grew during those first days, continued over the years, and I became involved in more in-depth study over the years. And so when I talk about the classical education, there needs to be a foundation. Classical Christian education, first of all, biblical literacy, a solid biblical foundation for children and teenagers as they grow to be adults. And it's looking at the education, Christian education, as kind of basic discipleship, following Jesus, his words, to teach them, as he said in the Great Commission, to teach them to do everything that I have commanded you. Biblical foundation, biblical familiarity, biblical literacy. And you can start children off with, I do have a video recommending this, Hurlbut's Story of the Bible, and then going on to learn to study the Bible for yourself. And if you're involved in church, consider whether your Sunday school is teaching the Bible systematically. There used to be international Sunday school lessons. I've looked for them online. I really can't find much of any place that's really doing that anymore, although I think that was continuing through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and it started out much earlier, where pretty much any Sunday school in the United States that was following those, or around the world, any English-speaking Sunday school, and I believe they were actually in many other languages too, that you would find the same basic lesson plan for each same part of the Bible, and that was originally put in there to keep the Sunday schools from competing with each other, to be able to provide the same kind of foundation, and that did bring people through the Bible regularly. And as you go through the Bible too, you learn it. It provides an unexpected literary foundation for understanding Western literature, art, and music. Because so much that we have in Shakespeare, in Bach, so much of our literature, Pilgrim's Progress, is informed by the Bible and contains biblical themes, biblical references, biblical characters. So getting the biblical literacy down there, first of all, is a part which I came into that unexpectedly, simply by starting to read the Bible. I'm afraid that it really didn't come that much through my church involvement. But then literary education. Literary education, that's what classical education was, a lot for the education of a free man. And that was the difference between someone who had a functional literacy, which I think functional literacy, where people could read road signs, contracts, and stuff like that, was much greater in the classical world than literary education. And that was what set a working man, a blue-collar man, a slave apart from a free man and a well-to-do man, the free literary education. And you can start out children with teaching them the Greek and Roman myths. They're entertaining themselves, and their children's versions of the myths, and the Iliad, the Odyssey, and about the Trojan War, maybe on to actual translations like Lattimore's translation, maybe eventually to, maybe classical languages also. I've recommended some books on that, and we don't believe in those myths anymore, but they're stories that inform us. They're part of our heritage and everything themselves, and they can provide some unexpected avenues to understanding, not only, from Greek and Roman mythology to understanding Indian mythology. Christianity and Hinduism is a book which I don't think I've recommended here, but Indian mythology does have some connections, some of the Indian gods, with the Greek and Roman gods. So we can give unexpected understanding there of one of the other long-term cultures, and for learning Chinese culture too. Some of the literary education you can continue with Sun Tzu, The Art of War, Confucius, Analects, and also continuing on with that and be able to understand other cultures from that point, to be able to have a critique, not to sit there before and have to expect them to be swallowed whole, but to understand the good and the bad, the commonality that we have as human beings and cultures. So languages, Greek and Latin is part of the classical culture. We did have Latin in high school. I did have 4 years of Latin in high school, and I think I would have done better if I concentrated on learning vocabulary more. I didn't know how to learn vocabulary very well. I had to depend upon my memory, which, as a high IQ person, it was better than average. But if I had systematically studied and learned vocabulary, I would have been much further along. Knowing grammar and syntax, you got to know your English grammar and syntax first, because that's the way that grammar and syntax, other languages are taught. You need to learn the alphabet. A lot of times people, when they have problems with Greek, it's because they haven't learned the alphabet. They're still struggling with the alphabet. And they can learn that thoroughly first, and how to accent as well. And those will form basis of learning other languages as well. I've also done some looking at French, a little bit of Spanish, Italian over the years. And Italian to me is like someone from the boondocks someone from trying to speak Latin, but hey, that's the way it is. That's what it really was there. But again, people need to learn English first, concentrate on vocabulary, flashcards, repetition, and learn how to read the language. Not just how to try to translate it, to understand the parts of speech. We call it parsing verbs in Greek, and some people seem to think I was just this parsing machine. No, I was a recognition of the parts and what they meant, but I wasn't going through the steps of parsing in my brain. I recognized. And that's the way it is, I think. And using language aloud, using that auditory part of the brain to engage it with the living language, and learning also the idioms of the language. Various idioms like we have in English, each language has its own idioms also. And pretty much any language culture is going to have literature that is enjoyable in some way. Some people, ancient literature does have quite a breadth of types of literature. You got drama, you got epic, and things like that, and Iliad, Odyssey. I know people that love the Odyssey, hated the Iliad, or hated the Odyssey, love the Iliad, and go on. Things like politics and philosophy, and some and Greek tragedy itself can be very engaging. So learning language and going into literature, appreciating that, and that will help that there. And that will help as part of it also, learning languages, learning how to appreciate other cultures, be able to speak outside your own English language. The straitjacket that a lot of people have as adults in understanding things sometimes is simply that there's isolated within a wrapper of English, and they don't know anything but English. And that's where you find some of the weird stuff that people come to talking about Greek and Hebrew, because the people who fall for that are people who don't know a language other than English, and they don't even know that very well. So the third thing, which I'm going to talk about right now, just I had all those things, the Greek, Latin, and I introduced the mythology and grammar and so on. But this right here, this book is one I recommend on my channel before. Hauser's book on logic as liberal art. And this is where I think that what I really didn't have, and the next one is going to be the part where I really could have had more from a classical perspective. Logic. The type of logic that I had, it's the basis of critical thinking, evaluating statements and systems and so on. The logic which I had was a type of logic which was contained in the English books, the type of logic that was debunking, basic debunking, and which contained in the English books which C.S. Lewis was critiquing in his book and series of lectures, The Abolition of Man. And that doesn't get a person very far at all. So, actually, debunking something isn't the same as understanding logic. And often debunking can be very prejudicial in itself, very stereotypical itself. And I don't think it gets people very far. Unfortunately, debunking is behind a lot of indoctrination nowadays. So, learning logic also. Part of the basis of science. Science is based not just upon itself. So the scientific method is not doesn't generate itself. It's based upon the ability to observe, the ability to reason, and there's logic in there. Someone saying that something is scientific and logical, where they better be able to quote and say what laws of logic, what laws of science, what scientific observations are being overturned. That's mere assertion. Yeah, that's a logical fallacy, mere assertion. Someone says that something's not scientific, something's not logical, but they cannot establish where it is not logical, where it is not scientific. So logic helps you to be able to understand science, be able to understand evaluation, be able to understand causation, be able to evaluate statements that are made upon observation and experimentation. So rhetoric and persuasion is the other one, which I don't think was really properly addressed during my unintentional classical education. We had communication and speech. And the rhetoric that I have was actually part of my classics degree, part of half of a class I had on classical literary criticism and rhetoric. And we went through Aristotle's Rhetoric. I ate that up. I got translation, at least 2 translations of that and some of the others. So, yeah, be able to express yourself well, be able to debate and reason. That's what rhetoric is about. In our speech classes, our communication classes, the teachers are well-intentioned, but I think that the way that the communication classes have gone, that it's gone too far away from the persuasion, the rhetoric, and inclusion of logic within that. To be able to express yourself well, express yourself reasonably, appeal to people on the basis of reason and not just upon emotion. Yeah, expressing yourself well, you will affect people's emotions, but it's not about just getting people hyped up or worked up. Not about giving them a buzz on thinking that they're doing something well. It's about expressing yourself well, expressing yourself reasonably, appealing to logic, appealing to conscience, appealing to reality. So, as continuing on with this ramble, so to speak, art and music in classical education are often continued. Being able to play an instrument, being able to sing, that was time-tested quality, and art also. One of the things I found, kudos to my elementary school art teacher, I can't remember her name at all, but when I came to a book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, which of Eddie Edwards, which I recommend too, I found that I knew most of the techniques there without remembering them, and then finally I just said, that came from my elementary school art. So you can teach children these things. They may not remember or put them into practice all their lives, but a lot of The techniques, the ideas can stay with them, and there's a natural procession from a classical background to understand these things. And our high culture, classical culture, sometimes we think that that's way up there for elites. No, that was popular culture at one time. People from all aspects of society liked art and music and like that classical music at one time, considered time-tested quality culture which dealt with truth and beauty. And a lot of the problems that we've had over the past century or so with art and music, which becoming something elitist, something weird, something downright strange and depraved at some point, began when Christians began to exit from the culture, and when people in that culture, the art and music, began to go on to unbelief, and actually many of them to play with the occult, play with things which are, um, you know, considered quite evil, with demonic, and that began about before and during and after World War One, and they were in a culture which dismissed the Bible, the factional unbelief, and there was some Greek mythology and philosophy, psychiatry explaining human condition. That was kind of the way things were at that time, but truth and beauty started to go out during that time when Christians began to neglect it, go away from it. And I think that if we begin to regard it well and support it, we'll find that we'll change our culture in ways which we don't realize. I've heard that in Japan, Bach desired to have Johann Sebastian Bach, little Johann Sebastian, is leading many people to Christ because they're wondering, what does he have? Yeah. And they go to his Christian commitment and his Christian background. So, understanding bad art, degenerate lyrics and background, bad music, which skews away from truth and beauty, and bad literature, you can find that when you start with the classical critiques, the classical criticism. It's not all 100% reliable. You know, sometimes people can disagree with some of the things that Aristotle and some of the others said at that time. But if we swallow and many of the things which have been coming out since then, it'll be uncritically dissatisfying. It will degrade and defile our mind. We need to be able to look at that, be able to see that that's truth and beauty, and sometimes designed to offend. Well, I don't want to be offended. I want what is true and beautiful. So I'm not going to be dissatisfied with that. I can critique that. I can recognize good technique if I see it. But among bad messages, degrading messages, and even depraved messages. So, and people who follow this path, they may find easier college education to get later degrees, specializing. I would encourage, science, technology, engineering, and math. Be careful of the liberal arts, except at a fairly conservative school, because I've seen it myself, how they become political indoctrination, grievances, and like that, and the foundation has been ignored, and often the things they're saying are even, they claim to be scientific, but they're not. So, other people have had a lot stronger critique of the liberal arts. Even Camille Paglia has had some critique of the way in which a lot of the education has been done since then. But let's some of the more practical steps I'm going to bring up right now. I've recommended this book, Logic is a Liberal Art. I recommend it again. I'm going to be going back over it myself again. So get educated on the Trivium first. Dorothy Sayers has a book, The Lost Tools of Learning, talking about Christian classical education. It's not a long book. Get educated there first. If you've got someone who's in public school and K through 12, you might be able to incorporate some of that stuff along the way. so that the child, when your child comes home, that it's not just playtime, phone time, etc., but that you're also making a contribution yourself to your child's education. And maybe to fill in the gaps if you're college age or older, to look at Dorothy Sayers' book first, The Lost Tools of Learning. C.S. Lewis, his book, The Abolition of Man, is, I think, the best education book I've ever read. I haven't read a lot of education books, but I've, gone through a number of them, and I still think his series of lectures put down in The Abolition of Man is still the best one. It's still the best thing to get informed. Doug Wilson has a decent book, been around about 20 years, The Case for Classical Education. And there are other books too. F.W. Farrar has a book on classical education. The whole connection of that, there's a German scholar from the 1920s onward, Werner Jaeger, 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 and Paideia, 3 volumes I got on my, and some of the other on my bookshelf. And there's a lot you can learn to become a subject matter expert, to know where education was, and to know what's valuable there, what we can carry forward. And again, continue language, grammar, use your own language, and maybe eventually in the linguistics. Oh yeah, I love linguistics. Logic is a liberal art, logic. Aristotle also. And this is the part which was missing in my background. Aristotle and Quintilian as far as rhetoric goes. And to understand how rhetoric can be misused in the wrong way. Plato has a dialogue called the Gorgias, Gorgias, which Socrates deals with three others there: Gorgias, Callicles, and Polus, rhetoricians, about the misuse of rhetoric. And if you want to know more about the misuse of learning, the Bible itself does talk about misuse of learning in Ethics of Aristotle, Nicomachean Ethics. He does have an earlier book on ethics which covers some of the same ground. So this is where I've been. Hope this is helpful. This may be kind of long, but just where I've been. And throughout our education system, there are still bits and pieces of the classical education there, and I think that considering about strengthening those, going back to those, and maybe if your children are in, or you yourself are involved in the public education system in some way, supplementing with some of these things might be a help to getting back, because the critique was going that yeah, we have vocational and career skills, but our educational institutions aren't really producing very good people. So we degenerate into too much vocational education, which doesn't produce a person who may have much of a moral compass going into that, where they're going, or may become political indoctrination and activism. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. God bless you.